A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Conversation coming over this next hour, you'll be able to help direct where our conversation goes. You might like to call in, you might have your own thought, you might have a question to ask, you might even have a brief story that you might like to tell, and we'll get some thoughts from our special guest. Because the chances are you know someone who is suffering issues around their mental health. An opportunity to dive into what we've been calling actually the messiness of how our Christian faith intersects with mental health. And our special guest today is a pastor who's been dealing with his own mental health stuff for over 2 decades. Pastor Dave Quak, he describes himself as both fully alive in Christ and fully tormented mentally. He's the host of a podcast called Sunburnt Souls. And if you're in this space, you might want to listen in especially close this morning. Pastor Dave Quak lives on the Gold Coast in Queensland, and his growing ministry is helping people find hope in the midst of mental health challenges. Dave, a special welcome along to 2020.
Oh, Neil, thank you so much for having me. I feel so blessed to be here. Thank you.
Dave, let me start with something really light.
Yes.
As I understand it, you like to live a lot.
Yes.
And laugh a lot.
Yeah.
Is that something that we all need to really, participate in, even if you feel like you've got mental health issues or not?
Yeah, I do. I think it's part and parcel, and part of Sunburnt Souls is that we're having fun conversations around a hard topic, but approaching it with a way that is relatable to everyone, we hope, anyway, yeah.
Now, you live on the Gold Coast,
yes,
and you're leading a church on the Gold Coast. We might even give that a mention shortly, but you're in a place where people love to go for a holiday.
Yeah.
And they spend time on the beach. And for Gold Coast people, having a sunburn, or if you're going on a holiday, getting a sunburn, as difficult as that is with the health issues around skin cancer and such things,
yep,
that's what a lot of people have when they go and visit the Gold Coast. You've got this podcast you've launched. It's about sunburnt souls. All of us know the feeling of a severe sunburn. The challenge there is having a warm shower when you've got a really red back.
Yes.
Those sorts of images come to mind. So is there something special about choosing that name, Sunburnt Souls, for your podcast?
Yeah, it is around the Gold Coast culture, which I love, but also, our ministry is really targeted for Australian people who have a unique sense of humour, and, we do things differently, I think, to the rest of the world. But for myself, when I think of sunburn, it's like there's degrees of sunburn that affect people different ways, and the way you treat it is different from person to person as well. So for some people, a hot shower's torture, and for others, it's okay. But the common thing and the common thread is the sunburn, right? And so if we've got a sunburnt soul, we're still existing like when you've got a sunburn. And you can still function, you can still go to work most of the time. You can get about your daily life, but there's an area of discomfort. There's an area of kind of like pain that you carry while you're existing.
Now, I'm no expert, but there are different levels of mental health challenges that people are experiencing.
Yeah.
And some right now will have in mind their own challenges and diagnosis, and some who are not diagnosed.
Yes.
How do you describe the breadth of the number of challenges that people can face in this space? Can you sort of, water it down to, bring it down to a place where you can understand, well, this sort of mental health, because I know that you're suffering bipolar.
Yes.
But there's all sorts of other mental health issues that people are battling.
Yeah. I think that's the complication, is that it's so messy, Neil. So, on one hand, some of us deal with, at the start of my mental health journey, I had mild anxiety, and at that time I was managing it with lifestyle and, I wasn't on any medication. But as I grew, ironically, in maturity, physically and spiritually and emotionally, my mental health actually deteriorated as I grew. And what was happening, I think, is that there was just a discrepancy between one way my life was going and the other. And so I think in amongst the messiness, all of us have this discrepancy, particularly if we're people of faith, where we are fully alive in Christ. I love Jesus. I will serve him to the day I meet him, Neil. I love him. But at the same time, there's this messy mental health brokenness happening beneath the surface. And so I think the messiness is where it's at. So to try to boil it down is really complicated. And I also want to reiterate something you said. You said you're not a mental health expert. Neither am I either. So I don't have qualifications in psychology or anything. I've just got lived experience and being a pastor in this space for quite a while now. Yeah.
And so for us, talking about an intersection of our faith and where mental health challenges are confronting, you are the lived experience. And that makes you, in some sense, an expert because you've got your own story to tell.
Yeah.
So with your challenges in bipolar, what does that mean? Does that mean you know, some days you wake up and it's just the best day ever?
Yes.
And some days you wake up and it's the worst day ever? Is that the way it works?
It really is. And so for me, the two ends of the poles are manic and depressive. So they used to call it manic depression. And so for me, when I'm manic, that's when I'm elated. And it can actually feel amazing. So in those times, you're filled with energy, you're not sleeping very much, you're very hyper-focused if it's going well. So if you imagine it like a wave, if I'm 70% up the wave of mania, I'm really efficient, I can devour scripture, speak to people all week long. But what happens is if I stay in that place too long, I kind of nudge above a healthy place and get to a place where I'm over the top and my thoughts stop making sense and you might speak over people or become just a little bit much for people. And so that can last anywhere from a couple of weeks. But where it becomes a problem is when it goes for extended periods. And a few years ago, it went for like 8 months in a row. And that's kind of what led to my diagnosis because I was working with a GP and a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and that was raising a lot of red flags. And so that can happen, but what tends to happen after mania is that when your body runs out of adrenaline and anything else that's keeping you going, you crash and you go from thinking you're the answer to the world's problems to thinking the world would be better off without you.
Dave, are there triggers for what makes you move from one state to another? I mean, you mentioned, when you get exhausted, because, perhaps when you're in that manic state, you just exhaust everything and then you crash.
Yeah.
Are there other triggers? How does that work?
Yeah, so it also flows over into my pastoring. So this is one of the hard things is that obviously as a pastor, you want to be leading by the Holy Spirit. You want to have intimacy with Jesus and you want to be able to make decisions in line with his will and his purposes. And so one of the hard things is if I'm manic, I really have to have lots of safeguards in place to make sure I'm hearing from God for the direction of our church and for our family. My wife's particularly supportive in that area. She's really discerning. We've got wise kind of like safeguards in place. But some of the triggers, something that can send me manic is overstimulation with people and ideas. So right now with you, I feel chemistry with you, Neil. And if we spoke for long enough, we'd find common interests and we'd start daydreaming about things we could implement. We've got common friends, so we could start sharing stories. And what happens is this chemistry that I think God provides becomes a trigger that becomes something that's overwhelming and too much if I don't watch it.
Let me just explore with you then the negative side of that.
Yeah.
We'll come back and we'll talk some more about the positive side. But when you are past that point, you've gone to a place of exhaustion and you're moving into a darker place.
Yeah.
What are you feeling in that moment?
You use the exact word and it is darkness. It feels like a blanket of darkness just descends over my personal life, my dreams, my desires, like everything just feels futile. And I resonate when, like in Psalm 88, he ends saying, darkness is my only friend, because that's what it feels like. So after I went on that really long sort of 8 months bout of unhealthy mania, I kind of fell into this really long heap of darkness that went for an extended period as well. And a lot of the days would start by me waking up and dreading the day. Oh no, it's here, because sleep's a bit of an escape. And so you wake up and the darkness arrives, and then you try to get through with that, the trinity of, God, coffee, and grit. You just try to get through the day. And by maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I would literally fall in a heap on my couch, and I have a man robe, Neil. Do you have a fluffy man robe, Neil?
Oh, look, no, I actually, I have a robe that my wife made for me about 20 or 30 years ago.
Okay,
actually,
so it's got comfort about it too.
I never wear it. It's actually too big. That's interesting because I've put on weight since she made it.
Maybe
but it's
she
always
made a
been
prophetic
too big.
robe.
Yeah. Anyway, tell us about
I've got
your
this
robe.
man robe, and by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, I would literally sit on my couch having it over my head as a sort of sensory deprivation, escape from the world. Like, I just had to take away stimulation. I had to be quiet. It had to be dark, and I had to and it was like this place of like escape and refuge. And so when it's great, but when it's terrible, it's really dark.
And you said that when your formal diagnosis came, you went through darkness for an 8-month stint.
Yeah.
So when I say some mornings you wake up and things are great, and other mornings it's not just like this is something that hits you for 24 hours. Sometimes this can last a long time.
It went for a long time, and I'm still working out some of the patterns, but for me it seems like the longer I'm manic, the longer my darkness lasts. And so because I came off a period of very long mania, when the darkness arrived, it seemed extended as well.
I want to be able to explore with you, and you talk about these things in your new podcast, Sunburnt Souls, this intersection of our Christian faith, when you know that you have these very high and very low lows. What does it do to you when you have faith in God and appreciate that He helps you manage through those times?
Yeah. Look, God literally has carried me. Like my faith in Him has been refined over the last few years to a place where I feel like I used to know about God. Now I feel like I know God. But it didn't come from a mountaintop in the sense. It really did come from a place of, in the darkness, I felt His presence sort of like hovering around me as a blanket of protection, and Him journeying with me. And I remember talking to a friend, and I was like, I don't know if I can keep going. And this man's mentored a lot of younger pastors, and he's just been around, and he said, look, Dave, you're not going to see it now, but you're going to look back one day and be thankful to God that He was there. And not only will you be thankful to God that He was there, you'll be thankful for the process because of what it refined in you. And to be honest, at the time, I couldn't think that was anything I could latch onto. I thought He was just trying to make me feel good or whatever, and it turns out it's right.
How much of the scripture makes a difference to you? Because sometimes feelings fluctuate, and that's obviously what happens with a bipolar situation. But when I reflect on scriptures like Matthew 11:28 through 30, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. What difference does it make that you have Jesus speaking into the moods of our lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And Neil, that verse, I would have not even exaggerated. I've read that thousands of times in all different versions just to make sure I'm believing that truth. Look, for Jesus to walk with me in this is the only thing that has got me through, to be honest, Neil. Like, without faith, I'm not sure I would have made it, during some of those real dark times. I think what I've discovered is that when we're broken and when we're journeying with this kind of thing, Jesus doesn't turn His back away from us. If anything, He draws closer to us. And in our brokenness is where His presence lies. And so before I was, in this process, I don't know if you can imagine, in my 20s, I was just that sort of typical extroverted youth leader, over-the-top loud guy, and if anyone had to come up to me for any kind of like discussion around this, I would assume, okay, let's just pray, and in 5 minutes you'll be delivered, set free, restored, and never deal with this again. Okay. Now, there's elements of that I wish it happened more. But then right on the other side, we've got our psychiatrist friends who don't think there's any sort of spiritual element to the mental health issues, but it's all just medical. So if we prescribe the right medication, then everything's going to be fine. And what I've discovered is that though there may be usable merits in both of those extremes, most of us exist in the messiness in between that, where we're trying to figure out, okay, what if this is Jesus? What if this is spiritual? What if this is medical? What if this is my soul being exhausted? Like, when King David's like, why are you downcast, oh my soul? Like he's speaking to himself, almost like declaring over himself, like, put faith in God. You've got this. You can get through. It's like he's speaking into his spirit. And I feel like having Jesus gives us that ability to be able to speak into that, to be able to declare, okay, you can get there. It doesn't mean it'll lift. It doesn't mean everything's going to feel fantastic, but you've got another day in you because of the power of Jesus.
Before we take any calls, Dave, when you said that there's something so significant about having faith in God, I guess it's a grounding. Sometimes I think of these things like having a superpower.
Yeah.
Now, that probably depends on which phase you might be in with your bipolar as to whether you feel like there's superpower there or not. But is the Word of God, this relationship we can have with Christ, is this something of a dimension that the Christian has in their tool chest that others are missing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And let's just start with the Word of God. Okay, so for me, if I'm not thinking clearly, whether it be up or down, I know through my life and experience and convictions that the Word of God, the wisdom in that trumps my own feelings at that point in time. So something I can do, even when it's difficult, is come back to the Word of God and even go back to that, the passage you quoted about coming to Jesus and finding rest for our souls. I can come into a place where I sit in truth that trumps my own truth and experience at that time. So it is. For me, I absolutely believe that I'm created by God, and so His will for me is best. And so if I can somehow tap into that, then I know I'm going to be okay.
Well, let's hear from listeners. Sonia is in Hobart, Tasmania. Hi, Sonia. Welcome along.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. What are your thoughts for our conversation, Sonia?
Just a question for Pastor Dave. I have a lot of experience with bipolar. My mother suffered with bipolar most of her life. She did pass away January this year. And I also have a brother with bipolar.
Yeah.
And I also had a grandfather with severe depression. Both my grandfather and my mother did have a little bit of religious background. I wouldn't say they were really religious and went to church all the time. When my mother was quite having her episodes, she would pull out the Bible and read the Bible and things like that.
Yeah.
But my question to you, Dave, is I get that you say that Jesus is there to help you and like having the Spirit and believing in God can get you through it. But do you think it's a combination of both that and your medication?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, medication is a big part of it because bipolar, you basically have a chemical imbalance in your brain. And the medication does help that. And obviously, people believing in God and whatever their beliefs are.
Sonia, you are raising a really important point here because even as Dave shared a little earlier, some people who want to deny faith in God will rely only on the medication. Dave, what is the balance here?
Yeah, this is a great question, and thank you for ringing in. I absolutely am a fan that medication is also a gift from God and part of the healing. So for myself, I'm on medication, and it has been a game changer for me. I'm on an antipsychotic and a mood stabilizer, and what that does is take away the intensity. So I'm definitely not one of those people who say it's spiritual only or medical only. I think that they coexist in the middle in that messy place, and they're both absolutely important in our recovery from mental health, and in our journey in mental health too.
Sonia, you mentioned that you've got family members who've suffered also with different mental health challenges. I'm just going to ask Dave here, does this run in families? I mean, if you've got these challenges yourself, would your family be worried that they might also suffer?
What seems to be the research is that if you're a parent and you have a child, they don't necessarily inherit the bipolar gene if you've got bipolar. However, if you are a child with bipolar, there's a high chance that one of your parents has or grandparents has. Does that make sense? So it's not generational that way, but it might explain why you've got a genetic disposition towards bipolar.
That's correct. That's what the psychiatrist told me.
Okay,
yeah. Like, I don't have bipolar. My mother had bipolar. My grandfather had depression. But it turned out one of my brothers only lately has been diagnosed with bipolar.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Sonia, thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316 to join in our conversation. We're talking about mental health, that intersection of our faith and mental health challenges. Let's take another call. Stephen is in Katherine in the Northern Territory. Hey, Stephen, welcome.
How are you going?
Good. What are your thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, well, I got depression and anxiety, have had for a long time. But, I'm on medication as well, just 160 milligram for, that. And, I'm just saying, I know where you're going, mate, but God rules.
Yep.
Let me just ask Stephen. Stephen, you're hearing Dave reflect on this intersection of faith and mental health. How are you finding your own faith as being something of a tool in the tool chest that helps you deal with the challenges?
It's the box. It's all the tools.
It's all the tools.
Just box it up.
So people without faith are really in a place where they're just at the mercy of the medication. Thoughts here, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, the medication will still work with somebody who doesn't have faith, just on a medical level, obviously. Like with if there's a supplement, it works irrespective of somebody's faith. What I think the difference is when you have faith, you have the medication and you have faith. It's like you're kind of approaching it from the two best angles possible.
Anything further from you, Steve?
No, I just think you're right, mate. No, without Jesus, it's a hard way.
Yeah, and Steve, man, I'll be praying for you, brother. Like if you're following Jesus in your depression, He's there with you, man. He hasn't turned His back on you,
Never has.
Nah.
Stephen in Katherine in the Northern Territory, thank you so much for your call. 1800 316 316 to join in our conversation today. Let's squeeze in another call before the news. Granville is in Rockingham in Western Australia. Hey, Granville, welcome.
Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you for Dave. Perhaps I'll just tell you that my wife passed away through depression. She passed away 12 years ago. And I'm just looking back now, it's a very complex thing, depression. She had depression, not bipolar, she had depression. And she tried medication. She had a very good GP. She tried different antidepressants, but none of them worked and gave them side effects. So not it's anyone's fault, but we never found a medication that would actually really help us. And she's a believer, I'm a believer. And I think that the other thing I found difficult is when people are depressed, you can't get up in the morning. You tend to shut people out. You lose friendships with people.
Yeah.
And your strength often to help is having those friendships with people coming in, encouraging you, supporting you. So my advice with people, if there is depression, apart obviously praying, your prayer life is important, and sharing and praying together. I think we should have prayed more together. But if you're able to get into a support through church or a group, so you're not shutting yourself off, because people with depression tend to do that, and it's not their fault. They feel so down and low, they can't cope with anyone, let alone their own children, So,
wonderful thoughts, Granville. Quick response here from Dave.
Yeah, Granville, and first of all, condolences for your wife. And also, you point out something good, that the medication, for some people, doesn't work, or if it does, it can take some time to get the balance correct. And so anyone that is on that journey, I would encourage them to have patience, because it can take time for certain things. And they're the sort of medications that take a couple of weeks to start seeing results as well. And in your case, you never got there, unfortunately, with your wife. But yeah, you make some really good points, Granville. Thank you.
Dave, I think we should just keep taking some calls and let listeners help to just direct where our conversation goes. Let's take another call. Nathaniel is in Brisbane, Queensland. Hey, Nathaniel, welcome.
Morning.
Morning to you, Nathaniel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I was actually calling up just to thank Pastor Dave Quak with what he did at the state youth camp and stuff. And I didn't even know. Yeah, I didn't even know you had. It was hard to tell you even had a mental health condition and that sort of stuff when you're up there preaching and stuff.
Oh, thank you, Nathaniel.
Okay, so you must have been on one of your manic highs, and I suppose that's actually a great thing for a preacher when you're in that state. But yeah, so for Nathaniel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so at that point, that was one of my favourite weeks. An amazing group of young people all crying out to Jesus. It was a joy to speak there, Neil. But yeah, when it comes to the mental health side, I was in a really healthy, 70% on the wave up. So thinking clearly, communicating well, praying fervently, and loving these kids. And so from a mental health point of view, that's when I'm at my best. It was awesome. It was just a blessing.
And while we've got Nathaniel on the line here, Nathaniel, do you suffer in any of these areas of mental health, bipolar? Or do you have some ups and downs? What's your position here?
I'm not 100% sure if it's a mental health condition, but I've got like ADHD and stuff, so sometimes it's not always as easy to focus, and when people are yelling at me and stuff, it's not always easy.
Yeah, Nathaniel, I'd put that in there as in the family. Actually, next week on the podcast, I've got an author with ADHD coming on who's written 30 books, and she's got ADHD and dyslexia, and so she might be someone who will be inspirational to you, bro, because, even ADHD, it can be a superpower when used correctly.
Nathaniel, you take that as an encouragement, but thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Let's take another call. Kira is also in Brisbane. Hey, Kira, welcome.
Hello, good to talk to you, and I just wanted to share about my best friend in New Zealand. She's actually a GP, and this is now like the third time that she's had lack of sleep over a period of time, which has actually ended up becoming severe clinical depression.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to say is that she has been trying so many different things, like antidepressants, plus she's also been taking medicinal cannabis, which is helpful for anxiety. Some people may know that, although very expensive. But so far she's not getting any relief, but I guess it would be really helpful to know if anyone out there, either with our person who's on the podcast, or maybe if they know of any psychiatrists in Auckland who may be very understanding. What we're worried about is that, if she just goes into the A&E or somewhere, or books an appointment with someone who doesn't understand, they may just book her into the local mental health ward, which is what we don't want, because really she just needs connection.
Kira, there might be some connections we can make to some referral to psychiatrists, or there might be a body that our special guest, Pastor Dave, knows that you can connect your friend with in New Zealand. But perhaps, Dave, you might have your own thoughts here, but one of the first things that Kira mentioned was issues around sleep. Other things that you might have picked up in that as well, but what are your thoughts here for Kira?
Yeah, just twofold. For the first thing, I would just encourage your friend to go to a GP again and start the process. They're the best with the referrals. They know they just know they've got networks with psychiatrists and everything else. Secondly, sleep deprivation is a real trigger when it comes to things like bipolar and ADHD and any of the more kind of like revved up mental health conditions, I think. And so if you can get that managed first, I remember in the early days, my psychologist said, look, let's just get 3 things sorted first: sleep, exercise, and eating well. And that was just a baseline thing for me.
One of the other things Kira mentioned, which for some will be very controversial, this thought around medical marijuana, and it's promoted as solves everyone's problems. Of course, commentators on this program will say that's actually just a third tier. There's lots of other better ways that you can deal with things. Do you find that people are looking at things like medical marijuana and they're trying everything they can to try and ease the pain and get those things under control?
Yeah, it seems to be the case. I do have a friend who's used prescription medical marijuana for his bipolar, but where I'm skeptical, firstly, I was an addicted person in my teenage years, so that definitely isn't a path that I want to go down. And secondly, I don't know enough, and I would love to have a guest come on who comes from a Christian worldview and can speak into this.
And we will occasionally have those sorts of guests on and argue very, very strongly that medical marijuana is not a good choice. No, we won't want to turn our conversation into a conversation around medical marijuana, but Kira, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation today. Let's take another call. Anna is in Bundamba in Queensland. Hey, Anna, welcome along.
Hi, Neil. Thank you for taking my call. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
Thanks for addressing this morning. I'm just wondering if you could give me some hints. My stepson has been diagnosed with bipolar in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a Christian. I'm wondering if you could give me some hints for the best ways to pray.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For me, if I was praying for him, I'd be just praying that he can sense the presence of God walking him through this process, that he gets the understanding that just because he has a mental health condition doesn't mean God is against him or punishing him or that he's done anything wrong in the scheme of things. It's part of the brokenness of this side of eternity. And so I would just encourage him towards God, brokenness and all, like all of us, that, Jesus can be the solution, whether it be bipolar or any other condition.
Well, we've got you here, Anna, and concerns around this sort of, spirituality for someone who's suffering through a mental health issue. And we spoke a little bit about this, I think, just earlier in our introduction, but the understanding or the sense of the presence of God for someone who's suffering mental health, and in a bipolar sense, when you're in that manic phase, you're actually even more open to spirituality than ordinary people who are not suffering a mental health challenge. So it's not something you should hold back on, talking about the presence of God and hearing the voice of God.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I went to a mental health ward yesterday to talk to a young man who's in there, and we spoke about all kinds of manner of things and heaps of spirituality as well, and he was up for the chat.
And I imagine there's caution here too, and while we've got Anna on this call, because people who are in some more serious levels of distress might be hearing voices, and without a founding and a grounding in what's biblical truth. At least if you've got biblical truth, you can alert that person to the fact that they're missing something. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. So depending on the variation of the bipolar 2 is whether you have psychosis or lapses of reality as well. And so sometimes when someone's got psychosis and they're losing grip in the mania, then the spiritual chats can get very convoluted and confusing. Yeah. And so is that what's happening as well in your world?
No. Well, actually, I haven't just spoken with him when he's in an episode.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit removed in that I'm not his mother. I'm his stepmother. So he would be dealing with the day-to-day. But, no, I'm just from a distance, just wanting to pray for him, support him, love him, encourage him.
Yeah. And that's the key. Support, love and encouragement is really where it's at.
Well, we've got Anna here.
Those are great words. Thanks for the presence.
While we've got Anna, the timing here, because if it's bipolar, you've got the up phase and the down phase.
Yeah.
Clearly, when you want to communicate these things spiritually, what's the timing here? When someone's in the midst of depression, or when they're actually maybe in the midst of that manic stage where they're very alert?
Yeah, I would be looking at after the dark phase, coming out of the darkness, in the early phases of coming out of the darkness.
I hope that's helpful. Anna, thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line open, 1-800-316-316, to join in our conversation today as we're talking about Sunburnt Souls. That's the name of a podcast that our special guest, Pastor Dave Quak, has. And you can simply Google Sunburnt Souls to be able to have access to him talking about mental health challenges with a whole lot of actually really fabulous guests on his podcast. Let's take another call. Stacey is on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. Hey, Stacey, welcome.
Yeah, hi.
What are your thoughts, Stacey?
I just wanted to give encouragement, really, because my husband had depression around just our early marriage, so it was 20 years ago or so now. But he had, in the beginning he wasn't keen for medication, but it was sort of like a need because it at least got him in a mental state where he would do exercise or he would agree to counselling. So as an encouragement to people, it was a 3-year journey of depression, but he was on the medication. But we just did a lot of counselling, and now he is a counsellor himself. So, yeah, he's using his journey to help others.
That's awesome, and we need to hear the positive stories, hey, because in the messiness, that's where great things can emerge, and that's where Jesus can really bring restoration. I'm so glad to hear that about your husband. That's so good.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, there is hope because in the midst of it is just not it's not pleasant. I feel for who has to, not just the people going through it, but those living with them.
Stacey, wonderful to hear from you. Thank you so much for your contribution. And while we're in this talking about people who are close, could be a spouse, family members, church members.
Yeah.
The thought that there needs to be, and one of the earlier callers said something I thought that was very important too, is that sometimes when you're in that depressive state, you lose friends. Having friends who understand you and will be able to walk with you through the darkness as well as into the light, that's got to be an important thing. Is there something special here about church family? How do you see things, Dave?
Yeah, that's such a good point, Neil. So for me, I think it's a matter of consideration and provision. So if you think about it, if someone came to your church in a wheelchair, of course you'd have a ramp, of course you'd move some chairs so they had a place in the congregation and felt part of it, right? But the difference is with mental illness, because you can't see it, it's harder to make provision. But earlier I said in my darkness, I had to sit underneath a robe, to feel a bit of sensory deprivation. My question is, how would we go in church if somebody did that? It's not that intrusive in my opinion, but, that sort of stuff rattles us because we're just not used to making provision. So I think my encouragement would be for faith communities and people encouraging those walking with mental illness is to really sow into them the same way you'd sow into anybody else who has a chronic illness, and get alongside them and love them at their best and at their worst and celebrate with them and draw them into your life. There's so many people. There's 1 in 4 Australians walking with this directly at the moment. That's such a massive population.
And there's been quite significant campaigns, hasn't there, trying to overcome stigma.
Yeah.
This thought that if someone has a mental health challenge, that, stay away from them, don't talk to them. People have come a long way.
They have.
And those sorts of campaigns have contributed to our thoughts that we can talk to people who have a mental health challenge and become their friend.
Absolutely. And we got to give credit where credit's due. A lot of that is like Beyond Blue and those organizations who just champion, mental health, wellness, and like you said, removing the stigma. I think there's a theological stigma we need to remove. I feel like it's almost gone within the church, but it's that idea that the person walking with the mental health condition has sin to bring that upon themselves. And it's unhelpful theology. And it floated around in the New Testament where the blind man was brought to Jesus and they said, who sinned so this man was born blind? Was it his father or grand? And Jesus is like, no, that's just not how it works. And so people with mental health conditions aren't in that position because they've sinned and this is God's reciprocity. I mean, that's terrible doctrine. It's part of the brokenness of our world that needs the stamp of Jesus, I think.
Let's take another call. Anne is in South Headland in Western Australia. Hello, Anne. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. for picking up my phone. I just want to talk on behalf of my daughter. I have no idea, about the mental health, but what I just experienced with my daughter is that 2 years ago, she was a good girl. She was 17 and she was in year 11. She go to school. After school, she go work, part-time job. But suddenly, she changed. She left here. She went back Melbourne, mom there. And from Melbourne, she went with other friend to Adelaide. And then in September, I got a call from Adelaide, from one of her friends saying, "Oh, your daughter, she's talking to the trees. She's talking by herself."
Mm.
And I couldn't believe that, and I said, "Okay, where's she now?" And then I tried to manage to send her a ticket, so she can go back to Melbourne. She been there, and then I went back to Melbourne also to visit her.
Mm.
And I saw her that she not like before when she was here in Sutherland with me.
Mm.
She changed totally. She, sometimes she can, even when she like washing the dishes in the kitchen, she can just suddenly she can stop, like she like busy with thinking for something.
Mm-hmm.
So we realized that with her mom that there is something wrong.
Yeah.
And it's been continuing now. And even now, he came back again to Sutherland with me now, yeah, but she's not able, she's not like before. She can, even as I spoke to you last night, she left. She left the door open, I don't know where she now. But she will come anyway.
And let's just get a thought or two here from Dave.
Yeah.
Because it sounds to me there's a sense in which you break the routine.
Yeah.
And for young people, this might be especially important because they're wanting to make a life for themselves.
Mm.
But you break the routine, and sometimes maybe it's the company you keep. Maybe it's just a different set of circumstances. Maybe there's financial challenges. Stuff changes.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. And if I was in the same position, my heart would be broken like yours is, but I'll do whatever I could to get her to start the process of finding out what it is behind all this behavior. If you can get her to a great GP or bring her back home or do something that gets her on the path towards, professional intervention, you 2 or 3 years from now, you might have the same daughter you have back, but a new and improved and redeemed version of the 17-year-old she was.
Some people might be thinking you could easily lose hope here.
Yeah.
Your own faith, when you've got a family member who is, off on a tangent, you have to keep your own faith strong and expectant. Again, as somebody who called in just a little earlier was saying, how do I pray here? My suspicion is that sometimes it's keeping our own faith strong is just as important as praying for the person who needs this sort of intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's reminding ourselves of the goodness of God. Like the only reason we know God is because he went after us the same way we're praying for him to go after our loved ones. And so it builds faith to say, he is in the process of restoration and redemption. His timing is not our timing. He's normally a lot more about the long game than we are, but he is faithful. And the prayer of a righteous person avails much. If you keep praying, you never know what God could do. My mum prayed me into the kingdom, and I nearly had no choice about the matter. The praying people, man, they make a difference.
Anne in South Headland, WA, thank you so much. Let's take one more call. Marissa is in Albany, WA. Hey, Marissa, welcome along.
Hi, Neil. How you going?
Good. What are your thoughts, Marissa?
Look, I just wanted to give my own experience feedback from bipolar. Back then, which is 17 years ago now, I think, 15 maybe. It was not much of a campaign or talk about the mental illness. And I was a new Christian. Albany is only a small city. And I find it really hard to have support. But luckily, my GP, I didn't know at that time, but eventually knew that he was Christian. And that is make a big difference.
Yeah.
So I can discuss about my faith. and also kind of realistic about the medical side of things, if you know what I mean. So, and also another thing, my psychiatrist, she also a believer, she's also a Christian, and she gave me the book. It's called Bipolar for Survival.
Okay.
And now I find it really, really helped me because when I read the book, it's actually confronting because I was in denial. You know, I wasn't accepting the mental illness so well, you know, because I just thinking I'm go loopy, you know, it's a horrible thing to happen for me. It's not me. It's never going to happen to me. But when I read the book and then I start to understand, and that between knowing God and believing in God and read the Bible, I kind of somehow find a balance of my walk.
Wonderful stuff, Marissa. Let me get a thought or two from Dave here, and Dave might have his own things that he's picked up from hearing your story. What stood out for me was that it's important which GP you're talking to, because if you are a Christian believer and you're looking for some areas of balance and understanding, you might be wise to find a GP who also shares your faith and belief values, because that may be the thing that actually really supercharges your recovery. Thoughts here from you, Dave?
And you're very fortunate to find a fantastic GP with the same faith as you. It's awesome. I think one thing you did really well in that little chat is you shared a good resource that other people might be able to jump onto as well. And I think that's the thing about building a community of support, is shared resource, whether it be a book recommendation or a human resource. You know, this GP is amazing. This person changed my life. It's about really championing those. And I do want to give a shout out to all the great GPs in Australia who care. Our GP is the greatest guy. His name's Paul, and I love him because he loves us and he has taken our family through this. And yep, so if you find a good GP, love on them. Give them flowers. Just make sure they're taken care of.
Marissa, thank you so much for your call. And time has run out. But Dave, let me ask you, just as we sort of tie some loose ends together, I've said you're pastoring a church.
Yep.
And you're dealing with the messiness, and there's sometimes, no doubt, awkwardness, and there's down times, and maybe the people in your church are a little bit tolerant of you too.
Yep.
And, you know, as you love them, they're loving you, even in the good times and the not so easy times.
Yeah.
Your church is called Living Temple Christian Church, Tugun, on the southern end of the Gold Coast. Is there something special you do in church life that enhances the well-being of people who are going through the same sort of issues you do?
I think just simply because I'm quite open speaking about it. It's just a culture now that, you know, we speak about mental health, and people who want to go to a church where it's openly spoken about come and find a spiritual home there. Yeah.
That's easy, isn't
it?
Yeah. Just a certain openness,
it's just an openness.
Transparency, and this perhaps works the same way if you're the pastor of a church to how you're performing in the workplace. You might be one of the workers, you might be a middle manager, you might be the chief, you might be in charge, but some level of transparency is going to help all of those around you to deal with some of those difficult times when you're going through things doing it tough.
Absolutely, Neil. Absolutely.
Now, Sunburnt Souls, I said to listeners, simply Google Sunburnt Souls. The website is sunburntSouls.com.
That's right.
And people can go through those at their own pace. Some people might want to listen to these, all of them, by the end of the day. How often are you releasing these podcasts?
So we release an episode every Monday morning. And our main guests are either people like myself with lived experience or experts speaking into this field.
So there's really good resource on your podcast. It's called Sunburnt Souls, sunburntSouls.com. And to connect with Dave and his wife Jess, they lead Living Temple Christian Church, Tugun, on the southern end of the Gold Coast. There's a website there too, livingtemple.com.au. Dave, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and your heart with us today on 2020.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.